So it may seem esoteric, but do you really care as much about your blood glucose reading as you do about how satisfied you are going to work each day, or the quality time that you spend with your family? Okay. That's something that, again, really important to ponder, because very often what we do, especially those of us who are, in the fitness industry, working in the fitness industry, we'll start to measure all these different things like our blood glucose, heart rate variability, resting heart rate, etc. And we have all of this idea of what's going on in our blood, but we don't know what's going on in our heart or in the hearts of our family members. And what I mean by that is, like, do you really do all of the things that bring you joy and that bring you that kind of that lasting sense of purpose and meaning? Are you really nourishing those things? Because sometimes what we can do when we get so hyper focused on micromanaging our health is that we forget about the more macro things, and we can spend so much time trying to measure our blood glucose that we don't spend time with family, and that we don't share our meals. And an example of that, it's such an obvious one that I've seen so much, and that is where someone just prepares all their meals, eats all their meals alone, and misses out on something so simple as just sharing a meal with your family, which can just be so incredibly valuable. And to be honest, in your early 20s or early in your training career, like some people get into training in their 30s and go through that obsessive phase, it can be very easy to focus on all that stuff. I think most people, they do come out the other end and realize that maybe some things are more important, and they need to find some balance between their very strict diet and, living a more normal lifestyle, eating with their kids, or passing on good food practices. The classic example we always talk about in the podcast is, if you're fasting until like 4 p.m. in the day or 6 p.m. in the day or whatever, like, is that something you pass on to your kids? Do you want them to see that, like, not eating standard meals is a good thing? Is that normal? Like, do you want to pass that on? I'm not so sure. Like, not many people would. And that's just something that we begin to ponder, I think, as we get a bit older. In my old age now, I've begun to realize that at a very worn out 26 years of age. But yeah, look, it is what it is.
That's fair, yeah. So basically, what we're saying at this point is, okay, we can categorize, we can lump things together, and we can look at it in terms of, like, we'll call it structural or physiological health. And you can be like, chase these different markers, right? Maybe you even go a little bit beyond that and go, okay, let's chase, emotional, or what we'll call a psychological health. We're like, okay, we'll layer that on, right? We can also look at it in terms of environmental health. And what I mean by this is not just like environmental toxins, for example, but I mean, like, how is your environment set up to actually support your health, community, society, your social situation, all of that stuff as well. And obviously there's a lot of components to environmental. We're not going to get into all of them, because again, like, we could be talking about this from a policy perspective. You could maybe want fantastic health, but the policies that are set up in your country or whatever are not conducive to good health. But either way, that is a component to all of this stuff. But there are a few wrinkles that we need to kind of iron out when we're discussing this stuff. And we kind of were just touching on it there. And the flourishing concept really helps you kind of cut through a lot of the noise. Now, I don't think it answers all the questions we would necessarily want it to answer, but it helps you really start analyzing this a little bit deeper, right? For example, there is something that we would call, well, maybe we'll put it in these terms, right? Like, when you're looking at your health, a lot of people will look through it in terms, or look through it from the lens, I suppose, of, I want to maximize the duration of my life. I want to live to 100, that's what I want. But that's not necessarily what you want if it means that, you don't feel great, you don't have a great like connection with people around you, you don't have your environment set up correctly, you don't have all of these other things, and you're just barely hanging on to 100 years old because you're like, that was the goal, that's what I see as health, a long life, right? Other people will be like, I want to maximize the intensity of my life, right? And they want to they don't care about trading off a couple of years at the end, because they're like, I want to really just get the most out of my health, my body, whatever, at this time. For example, you might see people, to give those two camps, you might see people in their 20s go on a load of like steroids, a load of different drugs, because they're like, I want to, literally be as big as I want, or do all these things, sporting, whatever, all of that. And they're like, right, intensity of my life, the amount that I'm packing into a single day, a single week, a single year, whatever, you're like, I'm really maximizing that, right? It's hard to say whether which one of those is healthier, whether maximizing the intensity and you're like, this person lives the most vibrant, really full on life, versus the other person that's like, I want to really maximize the duration. And you often see this in the health and longevity world where people are like, oh, I fast for weeks, I fast for days, I take different drugs, metformin, rapamycin, they take all these different drugs. And you're like looking at them and be like, they have literally this grayest skin, they look terrible, they look like they hate life. They're just cold all the time because their metabolic rate is so low because they're like, oh, higher metabolism, you don't want that for a long life. And they're doing all these things to extend their life, but the intensity, it's just not there. Right. It's just not, they're not living vibrantly. Right. So we have to look at this in terms of, we actually be pretty clear in terms of our definitions of what we're actually looking to achieve. And it's really hard because there's so many levels of analysis for this stuff, right? Are we looking to add years to our life, or are we adding more life to our years, right? And again, a classic example of this is you definitely have know someone, or vaguely know someone, or heard of someone that they've basically been surviving on a life support machine for the last 10 years of their life, and it's like their quality of life is just not there. They literally lay in a bed for 10 years. It's just like they really didn't see their family, they didn't enjoy it, they couldn't move, they couldn't do X, Y, and Z. And for some people, they might argue and say, oh, well, that person just had a terrible life, right? They're just, there's no quality to that life. But the thing about it is, it's very hard to say whether that person is healthy or not. Now, obviously, if they're on a life support machine, you could be argued that they're probably not in a healthful position. But that person might just fucking love doing mental arithmetic, and they're literally just sitting there doing the most fascinating, complex, in-depth maths, and they're just like, they're loving life. You don't know, so you cannot make a judgment on that without the full picture. And unfortunately, none of us will ever have the full picture because we didn't create life.